And welcome back. Now, COVID-19 has revealed the immeasurable extent of South Africa's deep inequalities and also its divided schizophrenic character. The country aspires to be recognized as a world-class, politically sophisticated and, of course, a socially caring society. However, the structural realities of our social and economic context make it difficult to hold that facade, and it reveals a polarized politics and political actors' relationship embroiled in bitter ideological contestations. And these are some of the observations of Wits University's Vice Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib, in a recent article. Habib also says that there's no doubt that the current leadership has been disappointing. Corruption is rampant, the country suffers widespread incompetencies, and his analysis is that political party options in South Africa and those available to the South African voter has a few alternatives. And Habib also asks, what will save South Africa from political and the economic abyss that we are currently facing? So Wits University's Vice Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib, joins us now to discuss this further. Professor Habib, good to speak to you again. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you for having me.
So the question you ask about pulling us back from the cliff that we are staring at here right now has become, interestingly, both rhetorical and also a cry for the South African nation. So what do you believe will save South Africa?
So I think a couple of things are important. I mean, what I did was write an article and then I accompanied it with two sets of threads of tweets that created some controversy. The article really says that South Africa is in deep, deep trouble, in part because of two factors. One is the lack of state capacity. We've been making appointments to the state of people without the kinds of required capabilities. And because they don't have the capabilities, whatever the president decides, whatever the minister decides, they're incapable of executing. So you might decide to spend 350 million on something, but if you have no people with the capabilities to distribute that, or the institutional know-how to distribute that, that money is not going to get anywhere. You might decide to have food parcels for people that are starving. But if you don't have the institutional capability to manage that, all of that gets stolen by cadres. And that's not simply a problem of corruption. It's a problem of capabilities, and it's a problem that we haven't confronted sufficiently. We need a state made up of people who know how to do the job. You need CFOs who need to know how to read a financial statement. That's the kind of conversation we have. Now, while we're at this moment, how do we address it? It seems to me that we do have capacity. So if you go into the private sector, for all of our other problems, and for all of its own problems, it has capacity. African breweries distribute alcohol to every shebeen in every township every week. This company has incredible transport logistics. If you drew them in, they would get food parcels out. If you spoke to the banking system, they would get social grants out. What you need is to start partnering the private sector. But the problem that stops it is trust. We don't have sufficient trust. And because we don't have that, we are not capable of harnessing where we have got capacity. And that's why we're in the deep, deep trouble we are. I accompanied that with a series of tweets saying, I'm disappointed with Cyril Ramaphosa. There's no denying it. But having said that, what are the kind of serious alternatives? Really, the DA, I believe, is administratively more efficient, but is not seen as somebody that would advance social justice and address our social justice cause. That's been open. Lots of people say that. The EFF is not a serious alternative. It's a nativist organization bordering on fascism, whose leaders put their own hands in the cookie jar. So frankly, the options are not great. We've got a rotten politician. And Cyril seems to be the most deep bunch.
Well, looking at where we find ourselves currently, and you speak quite a bit about COVID-19 and how this pandemic has basically exposed a lot of our weaknesses and inequalities. And I was saying to you off air, I disagree with a few things that you say. And one of them is that a lot of this has been flagged open by COVID-19. I believe that these inequalities have always been there. We've known about them. We've seen them. But because things like, job losses and obviously people going hungry, food security has been a problem for the poorer members of society. We didn't really focus on it as eloquently as perhaps we are doing right now, that members of the middle class and others are being hit by it, Professor Habib. So how would you respond to that?
So between you and me, I think we've been aware of it for a long time. Some of us have been writing about inequality and the deep, deep fissures in our society for a very, very long period of time. I think what COVID-19 has done is it's made it more acute. It's made it more evident. And as you say, it's broadened the consequences for sections of the middle classes. So there's no doubt that in this very, very difficult, surreal moment that all of us are living through, it's brought these inequalities to the fore. So when you need to deal with the pandemic, you need to deal with social distancing. But you can make as many decisions as you want sitting in Pretoria or Tshwane. How are you going to do social distancing in our townships when you've not addressed the housing crisis or the contradictions in the way our townships are spatially constructed? That's come to the fore in the most dramatic of ways. And if you don't fix it now, people die, are overwhelmed. We've known our hospitals have been in crisis for ages. We now see, well, there could be serious consequences because they could be overwhelmed. We've known people have been corrupt for a long period of time. Now we get incensed because it's 2.2 billion worth of PPEs. The cheek of these bloody corruptees, because you're stealing in the middle of a pandemic. You're stealing bread from the mouths of children. That's what we get really angry about. But we've known this has happened. We've been living with Jacob Zuma for the last 10 years. They've taken public institutions and brought it to their knees. And we all know, we've been appointing people who have got very little capabilities because either they're cadres or we've got this warped sense of transformation that says transformation and capabilities are different. They're not. We'll both transform and we must appoint people with capabilities. You can get people with capabilities that reflect the plurality of our population. So this is the kind of thing that we need an honest conversation on. You might moan about the corruption. You might moan about Jacob Zuma. But Jacob Zuma lost us a couple of 100 billion in corruption. He lost us trillions because of his incompetence. And until we fix that, and we have the hard discussions about BEE and how we implement transformation, we're not going to get problems and we're going to destroy the society. That's the conversation we have. And the problem is these political leaders are playing rhetorical games and not having the honest conversation that we need to have. And I do think that we need these conversations in forums like this as well. Our public discourse must get out of the rhetorical spectacle and deliberate on the hard questions that we need to ask as a society.
Well, speaking of the hard questions, Professor Habib, isn't it reductionist to reduce our problems to a Jacob Zuma moment when we know that Zuma by himself would not have been able to cause the type of destruction that we've seen? And why do we want to locate Jacob Zuma outside of the African National Congress? Because when we talk about the Zuma years, we forget that our current president was a deputy president to the self-same Jacob Zuma that we are singling out. Isn't that part of the problem in terms of how we approach this discourse?
Yeah, so when I use Jacob Zuma, I'm not using Jacob Zuma as the individual. I'm using Jacob Zuma as the symbolic expression of our political class. So I'm not speaking about Jacob Zuma, the person. In fact, I think that the problem is beyond Jacob Zuma, like you suggest, but it's also beyond the ANC. What I'm speaking about is what Jacob Zuma represents. A political class that thinks they have a right to take the public resources and look after themselves and their family. That's what I speak about when I speak about Jacob Zuma. What I'm speaking about when I speak about Jacob Zuma is a political class that is incompetent. Jacob Zuma was incompetent to lead.
But what does that say? What does that say about us as South Africans, as the electorate?
That's exactly right, and that's why I'm asking us to ask. Go ask yourself, go into that cabinet and ask yourself how many of those people actually have the capabilities to manage a portfolio that they are responsible for. Ask yourself that. Let's go through that cabinet. We probably will have 3 or 4 people that are trained in the area that they are meant to manage. The rest of them are kind of making it up as they go. They think managing water or managing energy is talking about radical economic transformation and learning how to toito. That's their substantive knowledge about the subjects they have. So, walk into Parliament and sit in the Portfolio Committee of Higher Education. How many have ever taught in a university? How many have ever understood what a university is about? 3/4 of them, their substantive capacity about universities is toitoing and trying to destroy the place. Now they're leading a portfolio committee. We have to ask, what kind of people are we appointing to the very apex of the state? And do they have the capabilities to undertake the jobs that they do? So
Professor
when I
Habib,
speak about Jacob Zuma, yeah.
We're out of time, but I need to ask you this, because ultimately it's about finding a solution and moving forward. So all of the issues that you have just outlined, where does this take us? Because you say as far as alternatives go with the political parties, the pickings are slim to non-existence as per your explanation. So the question then becomes, where does the answer come from? Does the answer to South Africa's problem lie with politics and politicians, or is there a different path that needs to be tread?
So I think that there are 2 parts to this. Firstly, I think the part is we need to start partnering the private sector. For all of its problems, it's got capabilities. And I think we need to deal with the problems we have, whether it's to distribute social grants or food, harness the capacities of the private sector, and pull them in so that we can start getting the immediate things done. Secondly, we need to start asking some hard questions about the kinds of people we are appointing. We need to start thinking about transforming the electoral system, as Musi Maimane had recommended yesterday. We need to start making capabilities, getting people with capabilities, with capacity, in structures that make decisions. And that's the way we do it. We need a 2-part. Immediately harness the capacities you have, and then start making appointments that are required in the political institutions of the state. Because if we don't do that, we're going to destroy ourselves. And third, let's act in the interest of the vast majority of citizens, which means ordinary citizens must be heard. I think 95% of South African society are decent human beings. It's the politicians that give us a bad name. And we need to take leadership and agency on our own as society.
Well, Professor Habib, thanks for that engagement. Professor Adam Habib talking to us about the state of our country, discussing what could possibly save South Africa from the political and the economic abyss that we find ourselves in. Well, we have to take a quick break before we say goodbye to our SABC2 viewers.